The ATM outside Riverside Bait and Tackle had been broken since Tuesday. Daniel Marsh knew this because he'd tried it Tuesday, tried it Wednesday, and was now standing in front of it on Thursday morning at 6:43 a.m., reading the same out-of-service screen with the particular exhaustion of a man who has stopped being surprised by small failures. Behind him, the Fox River caught the first flat light of an October morning, gray-green and quiet, mist sitting on the surface in long even bands the way it does when the night has been cold and the water hasn't caught up yet. He had $37 in his wallet, a list in his jacket pocket, and a problem he'd been doing the math on since 4 a.m., which was when his son Tommy had woken him up by climbing into bed and announcing, with the solemn urgency of a 7-year-old, that today was the day they were going fishing. Daniel had known about today for 2 weeks. He'd promised it for 2 weeks, a real trip, not the 40 minutes of bank fishing they sometimes did after school on the stretch behind the park. A real trip, the early start, the drive to Miller's Lake, the rental of an actual boat, the full day of it. Tommy had circled the date on the refrigerator calendar in green marker, which Daniel's daughter Maya, 11, the organized one, had then annotated with a small drawing of a fish, which was the closest thing the Marsh household had to an official seal of approval. The problem was the boat rental at Miller's Lake was $50, cash only, which was the kind of detail Daniel had written down and then failed to convert into action because the last 2 weeks had been the kind of 2 weeks that happened to people who were managing alone. He was 34. His wife Rachel had died 18 months ago, pancreatic cancer, very fast, the kind of fast that didn't allow for adjustment, just for the sudden rearrangement of everything you thought the future looked like. He worked 2 jobs, days at the County Water Authority, evenings 2 nights a week doing inventory at Hendrick's Hardware. He had 2 children who were, by any reasonable measure, doing better than they had any right to be, which Daniel attributed entirely to themselves and not to any particular quality of his parenting, which he considered adequate at best. He took out his wallet and counted again. 37. The boat was 50. He needed $13. He stood in the parking lot of Riverside Bait and Tackle at 6:43 in the morning and thought about his options, which were not extensive. The next ATM was the bank branch in town, 3 miles in the wrong direction. His buddy Keith, who might have lent him $20 without a second thought, was in Cincinnati visiting his mother. His mother-in-law Edna, who would have given him the money and then worried about him for a week, was asleep and he wasn't going to wake her for $13. The bait shop was open. He could see the light through the window, the handwritten sign, open 6 a.m., bait, tackle, local reports. He didn't know if they did cash back on purchases. He'd have to buy something. The leeches for the trip were already on the list and they cost about $8, which he could afford. He didn't know if $8 of leeches bought you $13 of cash back or if it even worked that way. He went inside. The interior of Riverside Bait and Tackle had the specific atmosphere of a place that had been exactly itself for 30 years and intended to remain so. The walls held rods and reels and nets and dents, overlapping arrangements. The refrigerator units along the back wall housed the live bait, fatheads, leeches, nightcrawlers, waxworms, each in their labeled compartments. A handwritten chalkboard above the register listed current conditions: Fox River, 52 degrees Fahrenheit, good clarity. Walleye and smallmouth active, use crawlers or leeches near structure. A second, smaller chalkboard said, Miller's Lake, pike eating well, try large suckers or big shiners, morning bite strong. Behind the counter was a man Daniel had seen before but never spoken to. Older, mid-60s, maybe, the weathered, durable look of someone who'd spent significant portions of their life outside. White hair, mostly, with some gray still in the eyebrows. He was tying what appeared to be a jig. Pale chartreuse body, working the thread with the focused patience of someone for whom this was not production but practice. He looked up when Daniel came in. Morning, he said. Morning. Daniel wiped his boots on the mat. ATM outside still out. Since Tuesday. Called the company. They said Friday. The man set down the jig. You need something specific or just browsing? Leeches for Miller's Lake. A dozen ribbon, if you've got them. He hesitated. And, I need to ask about cash back. On a debit purchase. The man looked at him. Not unkindly, just a direct, assessing look, the kind that belongs to people who spend a lot of time reading water and have transferred the habit to faces. We can do up to 20, the man said. Daniel exhaled. Okay. Good. That works. He went to the refrigerator unit and found the leeches, brought them to the counter. While the man was ringing them up, Daniel looked around the shop with the half-attention of someone who was mostly thinking about something else. He noticed the photographs on the wall beside the register, the kind of gallery every serious bait shop accumulates over decades, customers holding fish, boats on water, a few tournament photos, some shots that were old enough to be black and white. One of them caught his eye. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, holding a northern pike that was almost as long as he was, grinning the specific grin of a child who has just done something they'll remember forever. The man beside the boy was younger, maybe 40, and Daniel recognized the eyes, the man behind the counter. Your son? Daniel said. The man glanced at the photo. Something in his face shifted, a private quality, a door opening briefly. Was, he said. The single syllable carried everything it needed to. Daniel didn't push. Sorry, he said. Long time ago. The man entered the cashback amount. You fishing Miller's today? With my boy. He's 7. First real boat trip. The man nodded slowly. Good lake for a first trip. Not too big, decent shoreline to work, and the pike are active right now. You want to try the reeds on the east bank in the morning, they hold fish before the sun gets on them. I'll remember that. Daniel took his change, counted it, $6 from the leech's purchase, 20 cash back. $26. Added to the 37 in his wallet, 63. He had enough. The math had resolved. He should leave. He had a 7-year-old at home who had been awake since 4:30 and was probably, by now, wearing his life jacket in the kitchen. He stayed another moment, looking at the boy in the photograph. How old was he? Daniel asked. He wasn't sure why he asked. He didn't usually ask. 8, the man said. That fish weighed 9 pounds. He talked about it for a year. Tommy, my boy, he's been talking about today for 2 weeks. Drew a picture of the fish he's going to catch. It's on the refrigerator. The man looked at him. What did he draw? Big, Daniel said. Very big. Teeth. The man almost smiled. Pike country, he said. Tell him to keep his fingers out of the water. Daniel drove home with $63, his leeches, and the small expanded feeling of a morning that had turned out better than it started. Tommy was, in fact, wearing his life jacket in the kitchen. Maya was making toast with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that if the adults in her life were going to be chaotic, she would compensate by being extremely competent. She was 11 and she was succeeding. He's been ready since 5, she said, without looking up from the toast. I can see that. I made sandwiches. She pointed to a brown bag on the counter. Peanut butter, because I know Tommy won't eat anything else when he's excited, and ham for you because you never eat enough. Daniel looked at his daughter making lunch for a fishing trip she wasn't coming on, because she had a school project due Monday and had made the mature and clearly painful decision to stay home and work on it. And he felt the particular kind of love that doesn't have comfortable language, the love that includes grief, because the person who should also be witnessing this was not here. Maya. Don't, she said. Not unkindly. Have a good trip. Catch something. Let him hold it. She was 11 years old. He didn't know where she'd come from. Thank you, he said. Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had the life jacket, a hat with a fish on it that had been a birthday gift from Edna, and the expression of someone who has been waiting with heroic patience. Ready? He said. Daniel picked up the brown bag and the bait container. Ready, he said. Miller's Lake was 40 minutes north of town, off a county road that went to gravel for the last 2 miles, lined on both sides by the kind of second-growth woods that look wild but are really just old farmland returned to itself. The lake itself was about 300 acres, not huge, not small, shaped roughly like a kidney with a point of land extending from the west shore that the locals called the thumb. It had pike and perch and smallmouth bass and, in the deep channel on the north side, walleye. The rental operation was run out of a small dock shed by a man named Earl, who was about 70 and who had been renting boats on this lake for approximately the entire time the lake had existed. Earl was a man of few words who nonetheless managed to communicate, through the medium of those few words and a comprehensive set of facial expressions, an entire philosophy of fishing and possibly of life. 12-footer, he said, when Daniel arrived at the window. Oars included. Motors 25 extra. Just the oars, Daniel said. Earl looked at Tommy, who was standing beside his father with the life jacket and the hat and the solemn expression of someone at the beginning of a very important day. First trip? Earl said. Yes, sir, Tommy said. Earl went back inside and came out a moment later with a slip of paper that had a hand-drawn map of the lake on it. A proper map, not a photocopy, hand-drawn with clear marks indicating the reeds, the drop-offs, the points where fish held. Pike in the reeds east side, morning, he said. Perch on the drop by the thumb, afternoon. Don't anchor in the channel, there's boat traffic sometimes and they'll come through fast. He looked at Tommy. You keep your hands out of the water when you've got a pike on the line. They bite. I know, Tommy said. He had, Daniel realized, been briefed by the drawing on the refrigerator. The boat was old aluminum, sun-faded green, solid and flat-bottomed in the way of boats designed for stability rather than speed. Daniel loaded the gear, 2 rods, the tackle box, the bait, the brown bag Maya had packed, and helped Tommy in, and rowed them away from the dock into the cool October morning. The mist was still on the water. The light was white and diffuse, the sun somewhere behind a high thin overcast, giving the lake a quality of stillness that Daniel had felt before on water. The feeling that time is organized differently out here, that the ordinary pressure of hours is suspended. Tommy sat in the bow and watched the shore go by with a concentration so total it was almost meditative. They didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. This seemed right to both of them. The east reeds appeared on their right. A long fringe of cattails and emergent vegetation running maybe 80 yards along the shore, the water in front of them shallowing to maybe 3 feet, dark and tannic colored. This was pike water. Daniel could see it, the quality of the bottom, the depth, the way the reeds provided the ambush cover that a predator needed. He shipped the oars. The boat drifted to a stop. Here? Tommy said. Here, Daniel said. He rigged Tommy's rod first. A simple slip bobber setup, a leech on a hook below it, the bobber set to about 2 feet. Dropped it near the reed edge, handed the rod to Tommy. Watch the bobber, he said. When it goes down, you count to 3 and then set the hook. Count to 3, Tommy repeated. 3. Not 2. Not 5. 3. 3, Tommy confirmed, with the gravity of someone memorizing a code. Daniel rigged his own rod. The morning was quiet around them. A red-winged blackbird calling somewhere in the reeds, the sound of a car on the county road, distant enough to be only texture. The mist was thinning now as the air warmed, burning off in slow patches, revealing long corridors of open water. For 40 minutes, nothing happened. This was fishing, and this was fine. Tommy's bobber went under at 7:53. The fish was a perch. Not a pike, a perfectly respectable yellow perch of about 9 inches, which fought considerably above its weight class in shallow water and which Tommy handled with a combination of shrieking joy and extreme caution that was, Daniel thought, probably the optimal response to catching your first real fish from a real boat. He held it up for the required moment of triumph, the fish orange and black in the morning light, and Daniel took the photograph with his phone. Tommy, the fish, the hat with the fish on it, the reeds behind them, the white sky. He would send it to Maya. He would send it to Edna. He would print it and put it on the refrigerator next to the drawing of the very large pike with teeth. They caught 3 more perch over the next hour, one of which was large enough that Earl would probably have raised an eyebrow. They moved the boat twice, working along the reed edge. The sun came through the overcast around 9 and turned the water from gray to green, and the mist finished burning off, and the morning became the kind of October morning that justifies every early alarm and cold parking lot and ATM that doesn't work. At 9:30, another boat appeared from around the north shore. It was significantly nicer than their boat. It was a fiberglass base boat, dark blue, with a trolling motor that made no noise and a console set up in the center. It was the kind of boat that costs more than Daniel's car. There was one person in it, a man, sitting in the rear seat, holding a rod. He was perhaps 55, silver-haired, wearing a fishing jacket that had the specific purposeful look of expensive technical clothing. He had the relaxed posture of someone very used to being comfortable. The base boat drifted into the area perhaps 30 meters from them, the trolling motor making its silent adjustments. The man glanced over, registered them, gave the brief nod that is universal fishing acknowledgement, and made a cast toward the reeds. His cast was excellent, long, accurate, the lure landing within inches of the reed edge. Daniel noted this without particular feeling. Good equipment, good technique. The man knew what he was doing. For 10 minutes they fished in proximity, ignoring each other in the pleasant way of people who share a space and have no obligations about it. Then Tommy's second bobber set up. He'd been moved to a heavier rig with a larger leech, pike fishing in optimistic hope, did something it had not done all morning. It didn't go under. It ran. It moved laterally, fast, cutting a wake through the flat water, heading toward the reeds. Tommy stared at it. "Dad," he said. "I see it. Pick up the rod. Wait." The bobber went under. "Now," Daniel said. "Count of 3, 1, 2. Tommy struck. The rod bent hard. What followed was 5 minutes that Daniel knew, with the certainty of a parent witnessing something irreversible, that Tommy would still remember when he was 40. The fish was a pike. It was not the fish from the refrigerator drawing. It was smaller, maybe 4 pounds, a juvenile that was nonetheless in full possession of all the territorial fury of its species. It ran, it jumped once, it ran again, it went deep, it came up. Tommy hung on. He didn't reel when he should have been hanging on, and he reeled wrong twice, and Daniel coached him through the rod angle and the pressure, and twice the fish nearly took the rod from his hands, and the whole time Tommy made no sound except a kind of sustained, pressurized breathing that was the sound of a child fully consumed by a single moment. The pike came to the boat. Daniel wet his hand and lifted it, carefully, fingers away from the teeth as advertised, and held it for Tommy to see. Great fish. Green gold in the morning light, the markings of it like camouflage, the teeth exactly as promised. About 22 inches, well-conditioned, heavy in the hand. "Okay," Daniel said. "We're going to let this one go. Put your hand under it, right, like that, and we'll put it back." Tommy held the fish for 3 seconds in the water, then opened his hands and watched it go. It hung there for a moment, adjusting to its own freedom, then kicked once and was gone into the green dark. Tommy looked up. His face was the face of someone who has just been changed by something and knows it. "Again," he said, very quietly. "We'll try," Daniel said. From the other boat, the man in the expensive jacket was watching. When Daniel glanced over, the man looked quickly back at the water. But he'd been watching, the whole thing. Daniel could tell from the angle of the head. He didn't think anything about it. He helped Tommy re-rig, reset the bobber, put a new leech on. They beached the boat on a small gravel point for lunch at noon. Tommy ate both his peanut butter sandwiches and most of his chips and explained to Daniel, in considerable detail, exactly what the fight had felt like from his end. The rod had felt like it was alive. The fish had pulled harder than he expected. At one point he had thought the fish was pulling the boat. He was fairly certain this had been the best morning of his life. Daniel listened and ate the ham sandwich Maya had packed and agreed, at each required juncture, that yes, it had pulled hard, yes, a pike that size was impressive, yes, they would certainly try again. The man from the base boat had pulled up to a dock on the west shore, perhaps 300 meters away, and was eating something from what appeared to be an actual insulated cooler. Daniel watched him briefly and then didn't. It wasn't his business. But at around 12:30, the base boat came around the point and coasted toward the gravel beach on the trolling motor. The man brought it in neatly, stepped out, pulled it up, strong, despite whatever age he was, and walked over. He had the ease of someone who expects that his arrival will be accepted, but without the aggression that sometimes accompanies that expectation. "Your boy caught a nice one this morning," he said. "He did," Daniel said. The man looked at Tommy. "How big do you think it was?" Tommy considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "Bigger than my arm," he said. "Up to here." He indicated his elbow. "About right," the man said. He crouched down to Tommy's level, which Daniel noticed. "You know what you did well? You kept the rod tip up. A lot of grown men don't do that. They pull sideways and give the fish the angle." Tommy absorbed this with the look of someone receiving intelligence from a reliable source. The man straightened up. "James Whitfield," he said, to Daniel. "Daniel Marsh." They shook hands. Whitfield had the handshake of someone who'd spent time being assessed by handshakes and had decided to just have a functional one instead of a statement. "Mind if I sit for a minute? I've been in that boat since 5 and my back would appreciate a flat surface." "Help yourself." Whitfield sat on a log at the edge of the gravel, opened a water bottle, looked at the lake. He had the look of a person who knew how to be in a natural place. No restlessness, no need to fill silence. "You fish this lake much?" he asked. "First time," Daniel said. "You?" 20 years. "I know it probably better than I know my own house at this point." He looked at the water. "I have a place on the north shore. Up in the trees there." He gestured vaguely. Daniel looked in that direction. Through the trees, partially visible, was the upper story of something large and glass-fronted. He'd noticed it from the water without particularly noting it. "Good location," Daniel said. "It's quiet. That's what I need it to be." Whitfield turned the water bottle in his hands. "You drove up from town?" "About 40 minutes south." Whitfield nodded. He looked at Tommy, who had finished his sandwich and was now investigating the gravel beach with the scientific interest of a small boy near water. "First time in a boat?" "First real trip," Daniel said. "I promised him 2 weeks ago. He held it together well on that fish." "You taught him something before you came." "I taught him the count," Daniel said. "He did the rest." Whitfield was quiet for a moment. He watched Tommy pick up a stone and throw it at the water with the overhand throw of someone who has been told about skipping stones but hasn't quite committed to the mechanics yet. "How old?" he said. 7. Whitfield nodded. He said nothing for a moment, and then said, "I took my son fishing for the first time when he was 7. This lake, actually. Right there," he pointed to the reed line on the east shore. "He caught a perch about the size of my hand and acted like he'd landed a marlin." Daniel looked at the east shore. "The same reeds. The same water. He still fish?" Daniel asked. Whitfield was quiet for 2 seconds. "The same quality of silence as the man in the bait shop this morning, the same door opening briefly." "He passed away," he said. 11 years ago. He was 22. There were no words that made adequate contact with that fact and Daniel didn't try to manufacture them. "I'm sorry," he said. Simple and true. "Thank you." Whitfield looked at the water. "I come back to this lake every October. I don't entirely know why. It's not a comfortable feeling. But I keep coming back. He paused. Maybe to check if he's still here somehow. Which sounds insane said out loud. It doesn't sound insane, Daniel said. You lost someone. It wasn't a question. My wife. 18 months ago. Whitfield turned to look at him directly. Kids? 2. Tommy, and a girl, Maya, she's 11. She stayed home to work on a school project. She packed the lunch. He nodded at the brown bag. Whitfield looked at the brown bag for a moment. Something in his face changed. A slow settling, like something has been confirmed. How are you doing? He asked. Actually. It was the kind of question people often asked and usually didn't want answered honestly. Daniel looked at this man, stranger, wealthy by the evidence of his equipment and the glass-fronted house in the trees, someone who had lost a son and came back to this lake every October, and thought, this is someone asking actually. Some days better than others, Daniel said. This morning is a good one. Yes, Whitfield said. I can see that. Tommy had moved further down the beach and was engaged in an extensive project involving the arrangement of rocks by size, which appeared to require his full attention and left the two men in a pocket of quiet. What do you do? Whitfield asked. County Water Authority, Daniel said. And inventory at Hendrick's Hardware 2 nights a week. Whitfield received this without any visible reaction. And before? Before Rachel died, just the Water Authority. The second job was. He considered the words. An adjustment. Kids are expensive. They're expensive and also everything, Daniel said. The expensive part is just the packaging. Whitfield laughed, a genuine sound, surprised out of him. That's a good line. It's true, though. It is. Whitfield turned his water bottle. I have 3 companies. I started the first one in a garage in my early 30s, which is the origin story that everyone's supposed to have. It was not as romantic as that sounds. It was freezing in winter and my wife at the time was convinced I was destroying our lives and she turned out to be half right. I saved the company and lost the marriage. My son lived with me half the time and with her half the time and I worked too much, which is what people who work too much always say looking back. Did you know it at the time? I knew it and I decided it was temporary. That was the lie I told myself. That it was temporary, that once things were stable I'd have more time. But with things like that, temporary just extends. It extends and extends until, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Daniel understood. He'd made different choices, had always put the hours at home, but the logic of once things stabilize was familiar. He'd thought that too. Then the diagnosis, and after the diagnosis, nothing was temporary in the right direction. My son was proud of the company, Whitfield said. He used to tell people about it. I found that out later, that he talked about it to his friends. I didn't know while it was happening. I was too busy being inside to notice what it looked like from the outside. Daniel thought about Maya packing sandwiches this morning at 6 a.m. so that he and Tommy could have a good day. He thought about the fish drawing on the refrigerator. They see us more clearly than we see them, he said. Yes. Whitfield's voice was flat. Yes, they do. The afternoon was settling around them, the light had changed from white to the gentle gold of October midday, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. The lake was still and the far shore was a line of dark trees. Tommy had completed his rock arrangement and was now at the water's edge throwing experimental casts with a stick, practicing the motion, the same motion Daniel had shown him. Can I ask you something? Whitfield said. He was watching Tommy at the water's edge. Sure. This morning. The rental. You had to count your cash at the dock. Daniel went very still, not defensively, just, caught. Earl's a careful counter, he said. It wasn't a criticism, Whitfield said. I was watching from my dock when you came in. I wasn't trying to observe, I noticed. He paused. How much did you need? Daniel looked at him. I had enough. I worked it out. I know you had enough. I'm asking what the number was. $13, Daniel said. Short $13. I went into the bait shop for cash back. Whitfield nodded very slowly. He was looking at Tommy. I would have loaned you the $13 this morning, he said, if I'd known. You didn't know me this morning. No. But I would have done it anyway. He paused. I would have laughed at myself for saying that, a man short $13 asking a stranger in a boat. And then I would have done it anyway. Daniel looked at him. Why? Whitfield turned and met his eyes. Because you drove 40 minutes to bring your 7-year-old son fishing on a weekday. Because he was wearing a life jacket at 6 in the morning. Because you rigged his rod before your own. He paused. Because sometimes the reason a person needs $13 is the best possible reason, and those $13 are the most important $13 in the world. Daniel looked at the water. He didn't say anything for a moment. The particular weight of those words, the most important $13 in the world, settled somewhere in him that he hadn't expected to be touched. He'd been circling the date for 2 weeks, Daniel said. I know. I could see it in how he walked. Whitfield was quiet. My son walked like that the morning we came here. Couldn't eat breakfast. Too excited. He stood up, slowly, and looked out at the lake. This lake owes me a debt, he said. I don't know how to collect it from a lake. But I can see where some of it went. He looked at Tommy, who had turned from the water's edge and was looking at them with the inquisitive attention of a child who has sensed that something is being discussed without him. What's your name? Whitfield called. Tommy, Tommy said. Tommy. Come here a second. Tommy came over with the natural trust of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of unfamiliar adults, and stood looking at Whitfield with open curiosity. Do you know what you did right on that fish this morning? Tommy shook his head. You stayed calm, Whitfield said. When the fish ran, you didn't panic. You followed your dad's instructions. That's the hardest part. Most people panic. He crouched down. You want to know the second hardest part? Tommy nodded. Letting it go. Tommy thought about this. Because you want to keep it? Because you want to keep it, and because it was yours for a minute, and letting go of things that were yours is hard. Whitfield looked at him steadily. But you let it go and the lake kept it, and now the lake has your pike in it. Which means the lake owes you something. What does it owe me? Tommy asked, with complete seriousness. Come back and find out, Whitfield said. They fished through the afternoon. Whitfield went back to his boat and fished separately. They were never close enough to talk, but occasionally visible to each other across the water. Once, Daniel looked over and saw him sitting very still with his rod on his knees, not fishing, just watching the far shore. He didn't interpret this. It was not his to interpret. Tommy caught 2 more perch, a small bass that he was unreasonably delighted about, and had a long violent interaction with something large near the thumb that broke his line before he could see what it was and which would, Daniel suspected, be incorporated into the refrigerator drawing within 24 hours. At 4 o'clock, with the sun going flat and orange, they rowed back to the dock. Earl met them at the landing. How'd you do? He said to Tommy. Pike, Tommy said. And a bass. And 3 perch. He held up 3 fingers in case of any ambiguity about the quantity. Pike on the East Reeds? Yes, sir. Earl nodded, satisfied. He tied off the boat with the ease of 30 years. Same spot works every October, he said. The reeds hold heat longer than open water. Pike know that. He looked at Daniel. Good day? Very good day, Daniel said, and meant it completely. On the drive home, Tommy fell asleep in the back seat within 15 minutes. The deep, total sleep of a child who has been entirely used up by a day. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel and the windows down slightly, the cold October air coming in, the gray-blue of dusk settling over the county road. He thought about the man in the bait shop, the black and white photograph, the boy with the pike, the single syllable that held everything. He thought about Whitfield sitting still on the water with his rod on his knees. He thought about Rachel, who had not been a fishing person but had been a person who understood why fishing mattered, the stillness of it, the waiting, the way time reorganized itself on water. She'd understood that before Daniel had been able to explain it. He thought about $13 and a fish drawing on a refrigerator. He thought about Tommy's face when the pike swam out of his hands and disappeared. The lake has your pike in it. Which means the lake owes you something. At home, Maya was at the kitchen table with her school project, a diorama of an ecosystem, assembled from cardboard and cotton and the small careful hands of an 11-year-old who did things properly. She looked up when they came in. "How was it?" she said. "He caught a pike," Daniel said. Maya looked at her sleeping brother, now transferred to the couch, still wearing the hat. "I want to see the picture." Daniel showed her the picture on his phone, Tommy, the fish, the hat, the white sky. Maya looked at it for a long time. "He looks like her," she said quietly. Daniel looked at the photograph. Tommy had Rachel's eyes, the same quality of full present attention, the same look of someone who is exactly where they mean to be. "He does," Daniel said. Maya went back to her diorama. "I'm glad you took him," she said. "Me too." "Are you okay?" She said it the way she sometimes said it. "Not anxious, just checking, the way a good navigator checks the instruments even when the flight is smooth." "Yeah," he said. "Today I am." She nodded and bent back over the diorama. He stood in his kitchen for a moment, looking at the refrigerator, the circled date in green marker, the drawing of the very large pike with teeth, slightly lower and to the left, the small fish Maya had drawn beside it. He thought, "I'll bring them both next time." Maya would not have admitted to wanting to come, but she'd packed 2 sandwiches. He went to the counter and picked up his phone and, before he talked himself out of it, sent a text to the number on the card from Riverside Bait and Tackle, the man who'd been behind the counter, whose name he hadn't gotten. He'd seen the card by the register, shop contact, and taken it. "This is Daniel Marsh, from this morning. My son caught a pike on the East Reeds. I thought you should know." He wasn't sure why he sent it. The same way he wasn't sure why he'd asked about the boy in the photograph. The reply came 20 minutes later. "I'm glad." "What size?" Daniel thought about it. He typed, arm to elbow. Fought like it was bigger. A pause. Then, "The good ones always do. Come back in spring. Spawn run on that lake is something to see." Daniel looked at the message for a moment. Then at the refrigerator. Then at Tommy, still asleep on the couch, hat still on his head. He typed, "We will." 3 days later, a package arrived. It was addressed to Tommy Marsh, his full name, which was strange because Daniel was fairly certain he'd only introduced him as Tommy. The return address was a P.O. box he didn't recognize. Inside was a fishing rod. A real one, not expensive beyond sense, but quality, the kind of rod that was appropriate for a 7-year-old who was going to be serious about it. Medium light action, well balanced, a smooth reel already attached and spooled with 8-pound mono. There was a note, written by hand in the clear, deliberate script of someone who writes rarely and carefully. "Tommy. The count is 3. The rod tip stays up. The big ones need time, don't rush them. The lake owes you something. Now you'll be ready to collect. J. Whitfield. P.S. Tell your sister the sandwiches were the right call." Daniel read the postscript twice. He didn't know how Whitfield knew about the sandwiches. He supposed he must have mentioned them at the beach. Yes, he had, briefly. She packed the lunch. Whitfield had been listening with the attention of someone who stores small things. Tommy held the rod with both hands and looked at it for a long time without saying anything, which was unusual for Tommy. "It's for real fishing," he said finally. "Yes," Daniel said. "Not pretend fishing." "No. Not pretend." Tommy looked up. "Can we go back to the lake?" "In spring," Daniel said. "The man at the bait shop says there's a spawn run worth seeing." "What's a spawn run?" "It's when all the fish come to the shallows." Daniel searched for the right description. "It's when the lake wakes up." Tommy considered this. "I want to see that," he said. "We'll go," Daniel said. "All three of us?" He sent Whitfield a text. The rod arrived. "Thank you. Tommy is currently holding it like it's made of glass." The reply came quickly, which surprised him. He'd expected the reply to take a long time, the reply of a busy person, a wealthy person with better claims on his attention. "It's not made of glass. He should use it. That's what it's for. I'm glad he had a good day." Daniel typed, "We both did. More than I expected." He paused, then added, "My son let the pike go and came back for more. I think he inherited something." He meant from Rachel. He thought Whitfield might understand, and he did. "The best fishermen always do," Whitfield replied. "Give the lake time. It pays its debts." The spawn run on Miller's Lake happened in the second week of May. Daniel had looked it up, confirmed the timing with the man from Riverside Bait and Tackle, whose name he now knew, Henry Caswell, who had in the intervening months become something adjacent to a friend in the way that fishing people sometimes become friends, through the quiet shared language of water and patience and the things that can't quite be said another way. Henry had said, "Second week of May, when the water hits 55. Get there early. East reads again, the pike come right into the shallows. You'll see them before you catch them." They drove up on a Friday evening, Daniel, Tommy, and Maya, who had agreed to come with a casualness that fooled nobody. She had a new rod too, borrowed from Edna's garage, a medium-action spinning setup that had belonged to Edna's late husband and which Daniel had restrung and rebalanced. When he'd showed it to her, she'd examined it with the seriousness of someone who was not going to admit being excited and then asked him to show her the cast. They camped. A small site in the campground on the south shore, a tent, a fire, hot dogs that Tommy declared to be the best food he'd ever eaten, possibly because of the fire. Maya stargazed with Daniel's phone app and identified 4 constellations and argued about a 5th. Tommy fell asleep mid-sentence, again, the total unconsciousness of a child who is well and tired and safe. Daniel sat by the fire after they'd gone to the tent and looked at the lake. It was dark and still, and the far shore was only a line of slightly darker dark, and the stars were overhead in the quantity you only get far enough from town. Somewhere out there, in the east reeds, the pike were in the shallows. Tomorrow morning they'd be visible. Big fish, surprisingly visible in the clear shallow water, sometimes finning in the sun. He sat for a while with the night and the fire and the sound of the lake. It was a sound he'd become familiar with in the months since October, the particular silence of water, which isn't silence at all but a frequency of sound that the mind classifies as quiet because it asks nothing of you. He thought about Rachel. He did this often, and it still had weight, but the weight was a different quality than it had been 18 months ago. Less like something pressing down and more like something held. The way you hold a fish before you let it go. Present in the hands, alive, gone. He thought about Henry Caswell and the photograph on the wall. He thought about Whitfield on the water with his rod on his knees. He thought, people carry the weight differently. Some come back to the lake. Some make the rod and send it. Some pack the sandwiches and stay home and pretend they didn't want to come and then come. Some drive 40 minutes and stand in front of a broken ATM and count their cash and don't tell anyone they were short $13. He thought, the lake pays its debts. He wasn't sure he believed that literally, he was not a man given to magical thinking, but he believed it as a way of describing something true. That the things you bring to a body of water, the attention and the patience and the willingness to wait and the capacity to let go, come back to you. Not as money, not as luck. As mornings. As the look on a 7-year-old's face when a fish takes the line. As a woman you loved, seen in the eyes of your children. As a stranger who crouches to your kid's height and tells him the count is 3 and the rod tip stays up. In the morning, Tommy was the first one up. He had the rod Whitfield had sent, and he was already heading toward the water when Daniel came out of the tent. Maya was still inside but Daniel could hear her moving, which meant she'd be out in 3 minutes, which she was. The three of them walked down to the shore in the early May morning, the lake silver in the flat light, mist on the water again, and the east reeds just visible in the distance. Daniel could see the pike from the bank. They were there, finning in the shallows, big and still and present, the way they always were in May when the water hit 55. 3 of them that he could count, maybe more beyond. Tommy saw them and stopped. He stood very still, the way his father had taught him to stand near fish, and looked. "They're right there," he whispered. "Yes," Daniel said. "Can I try?" "That's why we're here." Tommy looked at his rod, then at the fish, then at his rod again. He took his stance. Feet apart, the slight forward weight that Daniel had shown him, the rod at 2 o'clock. He looked up at Daniel. "Count as 3, he said. "Count as 3, Daniel confirmed. Tommy cast. The lure landed 2 feet from the nearest pike, not perfect, but close, the result of a winter's worth of backyard practice, and the pike, responding to something ancient and involuntary in its nature, turned. Maya grabbed Daniel's arm without seeming to realize she was doing it. The pike hit. The rod bent. Tommy counted.